Okay, guys, welcome back to Holden's 11. I have a terrific guest tonight, and I can't wait to talk to him. Tonight's special guest is novelist Steve Guglich. Thanks for coming, Steve.
Oh, thanks. I'm so excited to be here. I've been it's been awesome watching your show and then now to have the chance to be a guest. So this is pretty awesome. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and I'll tell you, I'm one of the guys I've been watching behind the scenes, the production of your novel, and I'm really excited for it. Man, please expect me to be one of your first backers, and I can't wait to check this out. Do you have a launch
Thank
date?
you. November 1st.
Oh man, right around the corner. Perfect.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's so
Okay, so
exciting.
folks watching out there in YouTube land, go ahead and bookmark that for November 1st. Without further ado, we're going to launch right into our topic tonight, which is going to be the top 11 fantasy novels. I can't wait to talk about this one with you.
Yeah, this is going to be exciting.
And of course, I want to encourage people to feel free to disagree with us, right? The theme of our show is we just kind of celebrate the things that we love, and maybe we can hear about some of the things that inspired Steve on his journey, and I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. I'm
So
looking
without
forward to it.
further ado, let's launch right in. I got number 11, and he's going to appear on this list twice on account of who he is. It's The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Uh,
And are you a Tolkien fan?
I am a Tolkien fan, but I've actually never read the Silmarillion. I enjoyed definitely the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Hobbit. I loved growing up watching that, reading it. I mean, I took in Tolkien in every form that I could when I was younger.
Yeah, it's something I think novelists, it seems to be a common thread for them.
Yes. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, Tolkien's the grandfather of fantasy. I mean, or the father. I guess they call him the grandfather of fantasy. So yeah,
That's probably
or
a pretty
maybe
apt
the
description.
godfather of fantasy. I don't
I'm the same way too, and I did for that reason. I wanted to have the Silmarillion on the list, but you notice I kind of put it at the bottom because I will say that it's not an easy read, right? It's the one that a lot of people don't seem to like very much.
Yeah, it's definitely written more like a history book from what I understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much like a history book, and some people describe it as it's almost got sort of like a biblical element. You know, it starts out with the old gods and how they created the world and that kind of thing, which I guess
Awesome.
some of which
Yeah.
has been displayed in this new television show, which is on Amazon currently.
The
It
Rings
has
of
this,
Power.
yeah, it's
Yes.
got this terrific production value. I haven't really
Oh,
absorbed it too
I
much
have
yet.
watched it, and I tell you, I am not afraid to admit that I'm a fan. I think it's fabulous. I'm really enjoying it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because it's something I haven't checked out yet. And well, I don't want to give away too much because it's coming up in number 10 here, but it's something that I'm going to have to check out because I guess as a self-professed Tolkien fan, I would be doing a disservice if I didn't watch the TV
Well,
show,
see,
right?
that's the thing. If so, you've never read the Silmarillion either, huh?
No, I've read it.
Oh, you
Although,
have?
yeah, I got to love with you. I'm a super nerdy kind of guy. I rank the Silmarillion really high, but I
Okay.
like sort of like the dry
But
and
okay,
dusty
so
history stuff.
then you may not like the Rings of Power because that's one of the big controversies with that show is that they take from the Silmarillion, but they also decide to, do their things here and there. And so I think the more diehard Tolkien fans are not enjoying it as much. But I'm
That's what I heard. That's what I heard. And I sort of am leaving that to the side for now because, like we say, the theme of the show is to celebrate what we love. And
that's right.
I specifically try not to kind of rag on things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Well,
content on the
like
internet.
I said, I love it. I mean, I'm totally enjoying it. I'm a Rings of Power fan, that's for sure.
Well, you know what? On your recommendation, Steve, I will check that out. So while we kind of touched on the Amazon.Prime thing, let's launch right into number 10, which is Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. And I'm a fan of George R.R. Martin. I know he's somewhat divisive too, but
Yeah.
I think that he nails his character development. And I think that when you talk about successful fantasy, that's one of the things, right? You have to have these
Oh,
archetypal
for sure.
characters.
Yeah. I mean, you got to be able to you got to have the whole package in order to get, to do fantasy. You can have a good story, but then you get a bad character development or bad world building and that can collapse the whole thing. And I know that Martin does that. He's able to do all of that. Character development, story, world building, it's all there. Yeah.
Can I ask you, Steve, when you started your book, do you start with the story first and then populate it with characters, or do you start with the characters? Tell us a little bit about your
Well,
writing process.
I had I had the story idea and I started writing. I'm what they call a pantster. I kind of write by the seat of my pants. I don't do an outline because I tried outlining. Everybody's like, you gotta outline, you gotta
Yeah,
outline. And I started the outline, and when I started the outline, I just started writing anyway. So I'm like, this is a waste of my time. I'm just gonna write the stories. And so
yeah.
I did, and then I got sort of stuck there for a little bit. And I was talking to another fellow writer, Carlos Bo, and he asked me to critique his a passage or a chapter from his book. And when I read it, I was blown away. It was just so well written, but the world building really stuck out. I felt like as he was describing the world, I was walking through it, and I really commented on that. And he's like, Steve, I tell you, I've been working on this book for years. I actually built the entire city out of pizza boxes in my living room in New York City, he said.
That's
So,
awesome.
I mean, yeah, so that really got me into thinking, okay, so I need to go back and do some deep world building. And so I do consider that a passion and honestly an expertise. I do consider myself a deep world builder.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to check it out. I'm a world building guy myself, and I'm really looking forward to your novel, Steve. I'm
Thanks.
gonna day one. I'll be there. You can count on me.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
we'll move right into our number 9. It's Watership Down by Richard
Ah,
Adams.
man.
I'm a huge fan of
Oh,
Watership
yes.
Down.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I remember that as a kid, and just the tragic story of these animals, anthropomorphic animal. It was just such a great story. I mean, and I guess it would be considered fantasy. But most people, I don't know. I don't know. Do most people think of Watership Down as a fantasy or just a
You
story
know,
about animals that
I
talk?
think that's a good argument, Stephen. We talk about it's difficult to maintain the integrity of these lists, and for our viewers, we kind of chatted about this behind the scenes, and we had to kind of filter out some of the ones that were more sci-fi because,
Yeah.
for our purposes tonight, I wanted to keep it, things that are more in the wheelhouse of your upcoming novel. And to me, the even though it's anthropomorphic animals, Watership Down has kind of this epic feel, right?
Oh
And
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
the characters are portrayed almost like they were different races, and
Mhm.
I think the scope of the story lends itself to fantasy. And I noticed in my research that it seemed to crop up on all the lists, and
For
since it was one of
sure.
my
I mean,
favorites, I wanted to include it.
I'm sure that I mean, I would classify it as fantasy, but I think if you're just talking about to a person in general, yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It kind of transcends that because you can be a fan of a fantasy, and then you can also be a fan of Watership Down and not really like fantasy. But just because
Yeah,
the
good point.
story of Watership
Yeah,
Down is so engaging and tragic, and I
right.
mean, I remember I just shared it with my kids a few years back, and they were like, they didn't know what to make of it.
Yeah, and it's really kind of it has a similar kind of setup, right? Like it's sort of set up like there's these old gods that propel the belief systems of these anthropomorphic animals. Like there's El Ra and Frith, and they're these
Yeah.
it's almost like almost like a Christian type setup that
Yeah.
propels the story forward. And to me, I was fascinated by that when I was younger. I just couldn't believe that it was these, because I think you go into it thinking it's going to be these cute characters and maybe even a little
Exactly.
bit of humor, but it's this kind of tragic and
It
epic
it really
storyline that
is. I mean,
quickly, you couldn't put it down, right?
it could have easily have been alien races or fantasy races in some sense, It just I think that's what just made it so unique and different is that they had these great and vast cultures and background, and the world building was just there, but it just turned out to be animals.
Right, right. Hey, I'd like to ask you a question about that. When you make your characters, how do you, first off, how do you come up with the characters?
Mm. Well, like I said, I'm a deep world builder, which means that I go back, if I'm creating a race, I want to know everything about them. I want to know the why. I always start with the why. Why do they do this? Why do they have this? What's the origin of this tradition? So I do have in my series, it takes place here on Earth in the modern world, but it asks the question is what happened to the magic? Because if you go back in time and look at all this mythology and all these legends, there's so many stories out there about magic and myths and these creatures, and now they're not around anymore. So my series answers the question, what happened to them? And so the elves have their own sort of very, very wise old culture, and so do the dwarves, in the story, and some of them have just died out. So I always look at their motivation. If I'm writing from the elves' perspective, I got to think, okay, what is it about their culture? How do they act? And that's kind of where I find their voice and the decisions that they make.
Interesting. How do you come up with the names of your characters?
Well, and that goes into the whole deep world building. So, in the Veil Saga, one of the things that, like I said, it takes place here on Earth. So, um, the idea was that the elves were very influential in certain Middle Eastern cultures, and the dwarves were very instrumental in in the Scandinavian cultures. So they gave birth, or they create, the languages of the Middle East and the languages of Scandinavia came from them. So I had to use that as the root, and then I had to look at how those languages changed since in the story the elves and the dwarves disappear for a while. And so how did that language of the Middle East evolve, and how did the language of Scandinavia evolve, and then I had to naturally evolve the language of the elves and the dwarves. So it's all based on Proto-European languages, and Old Norse languages. Everything's based on that. So in that sense, it was easy, but it was also, I put myself in that box to stay in that lane.
Yeah, yeah. That sounds interesting, man.
Thanks.
Definitely. Moving into number 8, and this one might be a little divisive too. He's an unusual author maybe to appear on a fantasy list, but that is The Gunslinger by Stephen King. And one of the quick things about this book, it started out with kind of this simple premise, which was the gunslinger and the dark man. And
Yeah.
it kind of blossomed into this sort of medieval fantasy series with a lot of arms and a lot of, story arcs. Are you a Stephen King fan at all?
I'm a fan of some of his work. It's interesting that you say it's unusual that he appears on a fantasy list, but he just came out with a brand new fantasy novel. I mean, Die Hard,
What's the new one?
fantasy. It's called Fairy Tale. It just came out in September.
You know
A-
what? I don't think I've seen this one yet.
I've heard nothing but great things about it. So it's not a part of the Gunslinger series at all. It's a whole new series. I don't even know if
Gotcha.
it's going to be a series, but so you know, I think King himself is a fan of fantasy.
Right.
My editor Patrick Labroto, he actually was Stephen King's editor there for a while back. He helped him with
Wow.
Pet Cemetery and a few other stories. So
Sure.
it's fun to listen to Pat talk about Steve, and when he talks about Steve, he's talking about Stephen King like it's like I'm supposed to know who this guy is.
Well,
So,
you're going to
but
be the next one, brother.
that's cool. I'm all for it. But yeah,
I
Steve
was a
King
fan of
is
Stephen King, and I started with his, I guess you'd call it more traditional horror
yeah,
fare, which was
yeah. See
Salem's
that I
Lot and The
didn't care
Shining.
for. Yeah,
So, and of course I was young then, so it was very
yeah,
the way he was marketed, it was kind of like he was the writer and you had to follow him. And
yes.
I was always interested in stories. So that's how I got on the Stephen King train. But maybe
Yeah.
we'll take a quick detour back to what might be considered more traditional fantasy. And this is one called A Wizard of Earthsea. That's number 7. That's by
Yeah.
Ursula K. Le Guin. I
No,
hope I'm saying,
I'm
is it Le
embarrassed to
Guin?
say that I think it's Le Guin. Yeah, yeah. I'm embarrassed to say that's one series I have not read and I've heard so much about. So I don't know too much about it. It's on my to
Well,
be read
she's a
list,
little
but
bit she kind of ties into some of the things that you said earlier. And, by the way, viewers, feel free to chime in if you disagree with what we're saying. We would love to have a lively debate. But she's very
yeah.
much a world builder and very much her characters are very distinctive, is I guess what I would say. And when I say distinctive, I mean, Steve, they're downright weird, some of these
Wow.
characters, and
Okay.
almost to a level, even her fantasy to me feels a little bit like sci-fi-ish.
Mm.
And I'm a little bit more familiar with some of her sci-fi stuff. I'm got a little bit of a sci-fi background myself in my works. But the thing about her is she's got these characters that You know, sometimes you'll read a novel and the characters seem a little bit like they came from something else, and that's especially something noticeable in fantasy novels. But you don't get that from Ursula's book, because
Really?
these characters, yeah, they're just bizarre in some ways. And
Oh,
I always
interesting.
recommend anybody that's watching to, please take a look at some of these and discover
Yeah.
for yourself and see what you think. Maybe you disagree with me.
I'm gonna have to. I mean, people have told me that I need to read her stuff. So I mean, it's on my to be read list, but that just keeps expanding.
Well, yeah, and I guess one of the nice things too about the fantasy genre, you do have. I wanted to make sure I had some equal representation with more women writers, because I think
Sure.
sometimes, just by the virtue of me being male, I sometimes gravitate toward male writers, which it certainly isn't. To show a little equality, I guess, that
Sure.
because there's so many
Yeah.
darn
Oh,
good ones,
oh
that
yeah, for sure. She had to be on here. I mean, she's so well known in the fantasy. I mean,
right.
whenever you talk about female fantasy writers, she's
One
up
of the
there.
titans. Yeah, she's
Yep.
right up there. Well, and speaking of great writers, I wanted to circle back around to number 6. That's Eragon by Christopher Paolini, which, man, it's super interesting guy, this novelist. And what I find to be the most interesting thing about him, and there's several things, but I wanted to focus on, he started this book when he was like 15 years
I
old.
know, isn't that amazing? Yeah, and that's very inspiring. That's
It
awesome.
really is, right? And it kind of makes you go, like, first, let me ask you, what were you doing when you were 15?
When I was 15, I don't I guess I was in high school. It's actually when I first started reading, because I didn't was when I was a kid, I didn't I was into fantasy and sci-fi, but it was more the artwork or
Mm,
the
sure.
movies or the TV shows. But to get me to read, I wasn't much of a reader. And then one day in ninth grade, I'm sitting there and I have to write this book report, and thankfully the teacher said you can write whatever you want. So I'm like, oh gosh, I don't. Or you could read whatever book you want. It just has to be 200 pages or more. And I'm like, 200 pages? Gosh, I've never done that before. So so that was when I was 15, a freshman in high school, and the first book I ever really enjoyed reading was the A Spell for Chameleon by Piers Anthony, the first in the Xanth
Oh,
series.
wow.
So,
Yeah. Good stuff, man.
and here you got Christopher Paolini at 15 actually writing a
Right.
fantasy novel.
Doesn't that
That's
blow your
amazing.
mind?
Yeah.
That's something that, to me, I'll just make a quick comment about myself. When I was 15, I had just gotten a bass guitar for my birthday, and
Oh,
I was sure I was going to be a musician, you see. Which, and I still love music, as you probably know. But you think of all the twists and turns of somebody's life. To me, I almost can't imagine somebody at 15 saying, I'm going to be a novelist. And not only that, it was great and very well received. And, without, spending too much time on this topic, it went on to, be a video game and a series, and like so much expanded just from that one first
yeah.
book.
Yeah. I mean, he just I mean, he knocked it out of the park, and it's inspiring for me, because honestly, that's one of the things as an educator myself. I'm a middle school principal, and I've been a teacher for that's my career. One of the things I want to do is inspire young writers. I want to
Oh,
be
wow.
able to share my books with them, but also to kind of give them the boost that they're looking for to want to get into writing. So
Wow, that's
that
great, Steve. I didn't know that about you. That's thanks for what you do.
yeah, thank you.
I'll tell you,
Yeah.
because it's kind of relevant to what you mentioned, is that I had a little bit of an inspiration from a English teacher when I was, well, about that age. I guess I was probably 16 or 17, but it didn't come true for many, many years. But I often think back to what Mr. Sherman said to me in my junior year. He said, I can picture you taking some of these great ideas. You're going to be a terrific short story writer one day.
Wow, that's
And
yeah. Yep.
it didn't come true till many years later. But, I was a short story writer for many years, and I never got
Cool.
too much
I didn't
traction
know
with
that.
that. And yeah, and it was, of course, that's a different path, right? Like you submit them to magazines and this kind of things. But, as some of you guys know, about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, I started pairing them up with illustrations. And then it sort of started to, for
Yeah.
me anyway, to
I
take off a little bit.
I enjoy your comics. I mean, they're fabulous. Yeah,
Well,
and
thanks, man.
my
Thanks.
son and my son really liked the Hunchback one.
Yeah, yeah, that was a
That
fun
was
one. That was a
great.
fun one to make. And I know we share a common artist. We'll give him a shout out here. Our
That's
boy
right.
Erwin Arosa.
Yes,
He is
yeah.
the best. And did I understand he's doing some of the design work for your novel, the
He
character
is.
design?
He's done all the concept art
Oh man, great.
for the book. I mean, his art is featured on the cover. It's featured in on the website. Yeah, he does some fantastic work, and he really took my ideas and really brought them to life.
We're lucky to know a guy like that, aren't we?
Yes, very much so. He's a great guy.
So, without further ado, let's move on to number 5. This is man, it's so successful it almost has to be on any list, which is number 5. That's
Yes.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. And I have to be honest with you, I was first turned on to this by my daughter, who, of course, I'd never heard of it. It was already a thing by the time I'd
Hmm.
heard of it. But she said, "No, Dad, I think you might like this." And generally, I would say it wasn't really framed in a way that would 100% appeal to me, but I liked it, and I kinda like J.K. Rowling's writings, and
Yeah.
what did you think of it when it first came out?
Well, I didn't. I honestly same, very similar to what you were saying. Is I wasn't really turned on to it. I mean, I was like fantasy, but I don't know. I just there was something about Harry Potter that I didn't. I never picked it up, and I'm teaching a middle school special ed class, and I was trying to find some ways to get a couple of my kids interested in, and he was just talking about Harry Potter, and so we started reading Harry Potter in the classroom, and we read the first 5 books in the whole in that year of school. That was pretty much I turned that into the curriculum of
Nice.
for English because it was what they were interested in. It's and he got the other kids interested. So yeah, I mean that there's just so many levels and so many interesting things in that uh, just in that first book alone that just appeal to young readers. I mean, even
Right.
when you look at a book that size, and then the amazing thing to me was that kids were reading these thick books. You couldn't
Yeah.
get them to read those thick books
And by the way, churning through them, it was a page turner. Like the kids that I know, well, like in my family, again, I'll be honest with you, we're kind of a nerd family, and my daughter was the type. If you remember back then, they would have what they called a midnight release of these books.
Yes,
Right,
yes,
and you'd have to go to your
I,
local place and kind of
that's
stand in
right.
a line, and
And
I'm
dress
telling
up
you,
like the characters. Yeah, I
right,
mean,
yeah,
that's right. I
exactly.
remember doing that.
But she would even, she would have this book read in the first, like over the course of a weekend. And one
Yeah.
thing that I thought Rowling did very well, and I want to make, how do I say this? There's an element of simplicity to it. And I don't mean that in a way that it's not complex, because it is, but
Mhm.
she explains everything in a way that's very accessible, and she packs a lot of detail into a very economical package.
That's a good way of putting it. I think that's what the appeal is because I mean, what other there's no book out there that appeals to kids like that. I mean, they
Right. Right.
don't read are reading Harry Potter. It's insane. It's
And
unbelievable.
there's something to be said for a woman that got that many kids to read.
Yes.
I sometimes talk to my readers about how one of the things about reading is that you can't necessarily tell someone to read something, or they tend to resist it. I think they have to discover it and to,
Sure.
to sink their hooks into it, as it were. And
Oh,
music
definitely.
is the same way. Like if somebody's saying, "You got to hear this, you got to hear this," you start to go, I don't know, man. But if you
Yeah,
discover it on your own, you kind of
that's
take
right.
ownership of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, do you mind if I ask how long you've been teaching, Steve?
Oh gosh, this is my 28th year in education. So I
Oh,
was
well done.
right now I was been a principal for the last 12 years. So
Interesting,
yeah.
interesting. Hey, I
Yeah.
appreciate what you do, man. I just came
Thanks.
yesterday from my son's PTA meeting, and I told them the same thing. Particularly in the world we live in today, education
Hmm.
is more important than ever, and to devote your time to that craft, and especially to devote that many years to it, I'm thankful for what you did.
Thank you.
Sure, buddy.
Yeah, it's I mean it's definitely one of those careers that is career paths that that there are some days that are it's just so worth it, and some days where it's like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this?
Why am I doing
But
this to
I
myself?
mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, I will never forget this day as long as I live. I mean, it only happened just a few years ago. So, uh, first thing in the morning, I got several teachers called out sick. My secretary calls out sick. I don't have an assistant principal yet because I haven't hired one, and everything is just going nuts. I mean, there's so many things going on, and I'm getting stressed out. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to snap. And the sub who was or the para that I had to answer the phone says that comes to me and says, "You have a phone call," and I'm like, "Yeah, now you're telling me I got a phone call now?" And she said, "Yeah, you might want to take it. It's one of your students. He's about to go into surgery, and he wanted to talk to you."
Oh my gosh.
And at that minute, it just like every care in the world just totally just fell away. And I picked up this
Wow.
phone, and the mom's on the phone, and she says, "Yeah, they're rolling him down the hall now, and he asked to speak to you."
Hmm.
And he just wanted this. He missed saying good morning
Yeah.
to me because he was out. He was having brain surgery, and I'm like, "Oh
Oh my
my
gosh.
gosh,"
Is he okay?
And yeah, he's
Okay.
great. He's doing well now, but it's just incredible to think about. That that was a day that I just almost I wasn't gonna throw in the rope, but I was ready to throw in the rope, and
Sure.
here you just get this, this little hug from God that is just
Yeah,
like,
absolutely, man. You made a
wow.
difference.
Apparently, I
Yeah.
don't,
That's a
you
great
know,
story, Steve.
yeah, it was just, yeah, I'll never forget it.
Well, thanks
Yeah,
for sharing that one.
thanks.
So, moving on to the next element of our list here, kind of looking forward to talking about this and see what you think of this author. That's number 4, American Gods, Neil Gaiman.
Ah, Neil Gaiman is incredible. But I have not read this series yet. I want to. It's on my to be read list. But I've read his Norse gods. I've read oh gosh, what was the other one? Sandman series
Oh yeah,
by him.
yeah.
Yeah, but I have not yet picked up American Gods. Have
I
you?
I have, I'm a Neil Gaiman fan, full
Yeah.
disclosure here. So I will
Yes.
tell you, well, and I mentioned in the other show that you could probably make a pretty solid argument that Sandman is one of the reasons why I said, "Hey, maybe I'll try comics instead of short
Wow.
stories." Because, he writes like, what's the right phrasing here? Like, even in the Sandman, it isn't really set up like a comic necessarily.
No,
Like you
no.
could say the visuals sell it, but if you took all the visuals out, it's a terrific story and a terrific
Yes.
novel. I don't think you even need the visuals for it to still be one of
No.
Neil Gaiman's best works.
Yep.
The one, one small critical element I would have about Neil Gaiman and American Gods, because I know everything, I guess I'm so smart. But, as a British, guy, he doesn't always necessarily capture the essence of American characters. People are
Oh
probably
boy.
gonna flame me for saying that. And by the way, please keep in mind, I love all his characters and I love his work. He's one of my all-time favorites. So don't hear that I'm bashing him in some way. But sometimes when his American characters are even speaking, you kind of go, that sounds like a British fella to me.
Oh boy.
But
How does the TV series hold up to the books? Have you watched that at all?
the Sandman,
No, well, I haven't watched Sandman. No, I'm talking about the
I've
American
seen
Gods.
the Sandman TV show, but I haven't seen the
The
American
American God.
Gods TV
Okay.
show. And,
Gotcha.
the Sandman TV show, I'll tell you, I've seen the first 4 or 5, I guess, and they kind of did this really loving retelling of
Mm,
some of the script is word for word, and even the
wow.
scenes are, which
Well, I
is,
think he
I
was
kind of like
involved
that.
in it. I think he was involved.
That's
I
my
mean,
understanding. That's my
talk
understanding.
about your talent. I mean, this man, he's involved in the in the visual production of his shows. He does comic books. He narrates all his audiobooks. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just incredible.
Yeah, I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan, so I guess there's,
Yeah.
what more can you say? We could probably make a whole episode just about
I,
Neil Gaiman.
I'm gonna have to get yeah. I'm gonna have to move that one down in my TBR list.
Well, you're gonna like this one, I think. Our next one is number 3, and I can't wait to hear what you think about
Oh,
this. This is number 3, The Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson. Oh, you got it right there
I
handy.
got it right there
Okay, so
because
I'm
this.
gonna let you, yeah, if you don't
Oh,
mind, tell us a little bit about why you're a fan, and if you could touch on a little bit, we're Kickstarter creators, you and I. If you
yeah.
could mention a little bit about that too, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. For me, this is the book that sets the standard for all other fantasy novels. I mean, and that's what really blew my mind. I mean, you talk about the perfect storm of world building, storytelling, prose, and character development. It's right here. Look how thick this thing is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's thick, but it is phenomenal. I mean, I fell in love with his writing, and he quickly became my favorite author. I started with Mistborn, and I just couldn't stop reading all this stuff. And then when I got to this one, this is the last book that actually kept me up at night, that I just did not want to put it down. And I was up till past 1 o'clock in the morning, and I go to bed. Normally I go to bed between 9 and 10 because I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to write. But I'm reading this book. It was just, I mean, he just has a way of, like I said, he does it all well. I mean, he does the prose well, he does the storytelling well, he does the world building well. His world building is phenomenal in this book. And he just yeah, he just, I couldn't, I can't, I don't know, I could go on forever about him. That's what
Well, I'll definitely
so
check that one out on your
yeah,
recommendation.
yeah.
And
Oh yeah,
again, viewers,
it's a
if you hear some
series.
of these books, like I say, this is our way of telling you, please check some of these out. These are the ones
Yeah.
that we love, and we invite you to sort of discover them.
Mm.
Steve, can you tell us a little bit about there's I haven't read this one. I'll look forward to reading it, but I do want to mention I do know about his influential Kickstarter history,
Oh my
and
goodness.
how and you can probably explain it better than I can, so I'll give you a second. But like, he kind of writes these books in secret and then releases them to this huge
Well,
commercial success.
Well, that was the funny thing. So, okay, so the reason why it was so successful, I would say there's two reasons. Number one is he is one of the most in touch authors with his community.
Mm,
I mean, I mean, he is not afraid to talk to a fan. He is he does so much for his fans. I mean, so he comes out, so he's built this incredible fan base. And then one day he puts out this video where he looks haggard and he looks terrible, and he says, and tomorrow I want you guys to stay tuned because I have this announcement I need to make. And and all his fans are talking. The web pages are blowing up. Oh my gosh, something happened. He's sick.
right.
He's not going to write again. And everybody's panicking. And then he gets on the next day, releases the video, and again he looks haggard, worn down, and he introduces, and he says, I have to confess, I've been lying to you all. And then he just goes into this whole thing, and he starts saying, I wrote this book, and I wrote this book, and I wrote this all during the pandemic,
Right.
because the reason why he was able to write so many books during the pandemic is not, he's just a writing machine in general, but he wasn't touring. So he had more time to write,
Yeah.
and that was the big surprise. And so it's no wonder why he was able to make $42 million on a Kickstarter, because he built that fan base, and then he just built up the anticipation for this novel, for this big announcement.
Yeah.
And $42 million later, he broke the record. He broke every Kickstarter record. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Well, and the thing that is in my, and by the way, I remember all this, and I remember even how everybody was speculating about maybe what it was going to be, and
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun to be a part of.
Yes.
But
Well,
and
after the fact, I mean, people were worried at first.
right at first, it was like maybe something was wrong. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say that you touched on something that's really kind of important, and it reflects on guys like you and I, who were, sort of at the beginning of the arc of making a successful career out of writing and Kickstartering, which is the most important thing. And I think that Mr. Sanderson really illustrated this, is to be
Hmm.
in touch with your fan base.
For sure.
And, I say that in this sense because I noticed that there is a lot of pressure, I'll say, for lack of a better word, to produce a certain kind of content or to conform to a certain set of ideals. And I noticed that I don't do that necessarily.
Mm.
I try to do what I think my fans will like. And I think that you're the same way. Would you say you're the same way?
Well, I'm a people person, that's for sure. I mean, I definitely, it's the nature of my job, my day job as a principal, to
Yeah.
be a people person. But yeah, I just don't know how he does what he does. I mean, he's a machine. I mean, he writes, he does all these conventions, signs book after book after book. I mean, and he's able to do what no other writer has ever done. I mean,
Right.
because he makes it a point to connect with his community. And
Yeah.
you know, he'll do things for his community, you know, like did you hear what he did, you know, a couple of days after the
I
Kickstarter
I
broke all the
remember there
records?
was something for the returning. Tell us about it, Steve.
Well, yeah, he just went on and he got his whole team together and he said, "We're going to go through every publishing Kickstarter that is live during the month of March, and we're gonna fund it." And he funded, I don't know how many, but I mean, he did these brief little videos and they funded each one, and you know, and some of them he showcased, and you know, he was like, you know, there was one that, you know, that was a tearjerker because it was written for his dad or something, like written, you know, this guy was writing it for his dad and his
Right,
dad had
right.
passed away and he's like, "Oh, we got to fund that one." You know, that kind of thing.
That's awesome, man. That's really
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. I'm hoping he funds mine.
Well, we'll have as
Or at
we
least pledges. I'm hoping, you know.
yeah, I
Uh,
hope so too. As we go
yeah,
forward, because we're getting a little close to the end, I'll make sure at the end here we're going to tell you a little bit more about Steve's upcoming book and where you can find him and how you can pledge to this exciting new project.
thanks.
So as we move forward, number two, I'm a huge fan of this one, and its movie
Yes.
series didn't do too well, which
No.
surprised me. But the writing of it I like, and the author I just love.
Yes.
That's number two, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis.
Oh, yes. That's one of my all-time favorites, the whole series, but
Do you
um
remember when did you first hear about C.S. Lewis?
oh
In
gosh,
school,
when I
maybe?
was, well, no, my dad read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that was the only one he read to us or told us about, but because I didn't know that there were other books in the series. Like I said, I wasn't
Mhm.
much of a reader, but so he, you know, the other books, again, I think I was a teacher when I finally read all the other books and read them with my students. But I just and then when I became a Christian, I learned more about who C.S. Lewis was
Right,
and you know, and some of the symbolism in the books.
right. Which is pretty strong in some of his books,
Oh,
and
yes.
you know, I think that that's one of the things that could potentially, distract readers. But I think he does it perfectly,
Oh, yeah,
and
he does.
you might make a pretty solid argument that it is the best allegory, out of many of the books out there,
Yeah.
or at least that's one man's opinion, folks.
Well,
Like I
some
say,
people argue, they'll tell you it's not an allegory. They'll go back and forth. He never intended, but I mean, there's definitely a lot of symbolism in there. Like, I mean, you can, one of my favorite lines from the books is, and I believe I was either Dawn Treader or Prince Caspian, where Lucy and Aslan are on the shore, and Lucy's getting ready to go back, and Aslan tells her that in your world, I'm known by another name. It's best that you learn what that is. I get chills when I hear that line. I'm
yes,
like,
good stuff,
whoa,
man. Good
that
stuff.
was, and I love that they actually kept it in the movie. That line was in the movie. So yeah, it's good, really good stuff.
That's one of the reasons why I tried to place it kind of high on the list. It's it's certainly a story I think that can reach
Yes.
everybody.
Oh, it has. I mean, you know, people will, you know, won't even realize the symbolism that's in there. And, you know, and
Right, right.
one of the things that Lewis said that really appeals to me as a writer and a Christian is that he he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect that um what the world needs is not more people writing Christian stories, but more Christians writing good stories. What
Mm,
I thought was just a great, you know, a great
it's a great line.
uh, it's a great line, and it's very telling for me as a Christian, you know, because you know my stories, there's definitely Christian elements in it, but it's not preachy. It's not it's not gonna, you know, you're not gonna turn to the end and be faced with, you know,
Right.
you know, you have to convert or anything like that. It's, I mean, but
Well, and
you
I
know,
think that's a smart way to do it, Steve. And like we were
yeah, I
saying,
mean,
it's
it's a
what you want to do is
story.
get people to discover it, and
Yeah. I just want, you know, I want to write a good story and I want people to enjoy it and you know, and interpret things the way they want to. And if they
w-
want to know more, I'm here.
yeah, that's while we're on the subject of C.S. Lewis, and I won't belabor this because it technically belongs on it wasn't quite fantasy. That's why I didn't mention it. But are you a fan of Out of the Silent Planet, which is his kind of sci-fi story, or do you
That
know
was
it?
the sci-fi trilogy, the 3 that he wrote,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
and I wasn't when I was younger because I really didn't understand it. I mean, that one is more, overtly Christian from what I remember or what I understand, because it talks. I think the premise is that there's no sin on that world, on those worlds, right?
Correct, correct. And
Yeah.
the reason why our planet doesn't give off a signal, which can be traced, is because our world is bent. Which
Yeah.
it's a terrific book, and like I say,
Ah.
you read these when you were young, and I didn't understand any of the Christian themes. I just thought it was an
Yeah.
awesome story. And
Yes.
the thing that I particularly like about it, which is also going to tie into number one, I'm a little bit of a language guy. And
Yes.
I like the rhythm of language. I love the rhythm of words, and the certain cadence with which people speak is appealing to me. And it's definitely apparent in C.S. Lewis work, and it's certainly apparent in our number one pick. You probably guessed already what it is. Number one, Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
mean, what can you say about a work that is still thriving today, for one
yes,
thing?
it's transcended generations. I mean, it is like they say, he's the grandfather of fantasy. I mean, all the tropes that we talk about in these fantasy books that we write these days are, I mean, he did most of them first.
Right, and he does something that's kinda cool, which I try to live by today, and it's something that I always apply to writing projects, no matter what I'm writing for, and it's the element that if the lights are turned off, you can still tell who is speaking. Like,
Mm.
everybody has a certain way that they talk, and it's almost like a for lack of a better word, when I was young, I would just say, "Well, they talk kind of funny," you know? Like, the dwarf talks funny and the elf talks
Yes.
funny, but I in certain ways, you could like I say, if you couldn't see the characters at all, you can tell who's talking.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure. And that's it's called the character's voice. I mean, every voice needs to be distinct. And that's definitely something that I made sure of. I agonized over with with a lot of characters. Some of the characters it came really easy for, and others, especially like the dwarves in my book, I wanted them to have a very specific sort of way of speaking, and I I analyzed every word to make sure that when it was translated into English, it still had that, like you said, sort of cadence there.
Right.
And I know that Tolkien started his whole series was based on just writing in Elven language. Just
Right. Isn't that
that was
amazing?
his whole background was in. Yeah.
Yeah, he's gonna and there's a couple of funny memes about it, but the one is something along lines, "I'm gonna invent this deep and archaic language in this beautiful and lush world, and then I'm gonna start a war in it." Which is kind of what he did,
I've
and
never seen that. Yeah, he did. Yeah, that's pretty
for
cool.
my, experience with Tolkien, I was in 10th grade or maybe 11th grade. Like most people, I was turned on to The Hobbit first.
Hmm.
And which I think is the correct way to do it, kinda tying back to the Rowling's works, which is, you sort of discover it a little bit, and it's
Yep.
charming, and it's this great storyline, but you start to go, "Hey, well, there's all these races of people and creatures, and they all kind of interact." And right about that time, I can remember being in New York City to go and see a ball game. It was at Shea Stadium, we were seeing the
Oh,
Yankees.
the Mets.
My dad took me, yeah, and, maybe it was the Mets now that you're saying that,
If it
but
was Shea Stadium, it was definitely the Mets,
it
unless
was the
the Mets
Mets,
were
yeah.
playing Yankees. But
And, looking up on a bridge and somebody had spray painted graffiti, it said, "Frodo lives." And that made me
that's
want to
cool.
track down who Frodo was, and that was
Oh,
how I discovered Lord of the Rings, which I started at a young age. And again, that was the same thing for me. You dive into it, it's this deep
yes.
pool, and I couldn't put it down. Out of the it's of course, it's a trilogy of books. Do you have a favorite among the trilogy?
Um, I well, the Return of the King, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But I still think The Hobbit is my favorite because it's such a tender, story. It's got a little bit more. Um, it's just about this hobbit.
Yeah, it's
It
got a lot
really
of
is.
heart.
It's got a lot of heart. Yeah, and I remember when I was, the way I got into it. Like I said, I wasn't a reader until I was in high school. So I remember Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the
Yeah,
Rings and The
yeah.
Hobbit, and just the artwork was just in, phenomenal. That was one of the things I loved to collect was fantasy artwork, and um, that I know a lot of people these days they're not fans of the Ralph Bakshi's Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies because they're not as faithful to the stories as as they would like them to be. But that's how
Right.
I fell in love with it. And then when I was finally old enough and brave enough to finally read it myself, I still loved it. I mean, I thought it was
Yeah.
just incredible. I mean, I what I really want to do now, I don't know if you like audiobooks, but did you hear
I
Andy
do.
Serkis recorded the whole thing?
I didn't. That sounds
Andy
amazing though.
Serkis, I
Yeah.
know. I've heard nothing but amazing things. So I think that's probably going to be one of the audiobooks I pick up in the near future. Is
You know,
I got
there was even a this is if you hadn't mentioned that first, I wouldn't have said anything, but you might like this. There is an audiobook of Lord of the Rings. It's selected passages read by J.R.R. Tolkien before he passed, and he even
Oh,
reads some of the poems through the books. And
wow.
like again, I'm such a nerd that
Yeah,
I even listened to that, and you know,
I
the
would
audio
love
is
to
not
hear.
very good. Admittedly, there's no sound
Um,
effects. It's him. Yeah, I mean, that had to be the 50s, right? So you can
yeah, I'm
imagine what the
sure.
sound quality is, but it's his voice, and you can really kind of feel the love that he has for the source
Wow,
material. It's really neat.
that's cool.
It's like a 6 disc set.
Oh, I'll have to see if it's available on Audible. I wonder if it is. That's cool.
Yeah,
If
yeah, I
not,
definitely
I'll have to
recommend it.
dig it
But yeah,
out.
I'm a Ralph Bakshi fan too. Man, we got a lot of things in common, Steve.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Did you ever see, not to get too far off the track, but did you ever see his book, his movie Wizards?
Wizards? Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I knew you were gonna
Yeah.
go there.
Which
Another
that's
one with
kind of
the
his
artwork was
marriage
amazing.
between sci-fi and fantasy.
Yes, yeah, definitely science fantasy, I would say. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that's a good blend. And of course, that would have came out. That was pre-Star Wars, wasn't it?
I
Or maybe right around the
I
same
think it was
time.
right around the same time. I believe it was 78, wasn't it?
It
Is that
could be. I don't necessarily
yeah,
remember the year, but I
yeah,
do remember seeing that when I was young, and that
yeah.
one had a profound influence on me too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I had Bakshi. My dad, I believe, had my dad was a big fantasy art fan too. So he used to have in his shop. He had the Frazetta calendar one year, and another
Oh,
year he had a
sure.
Bakshi
Yeah.
calendar. So yeah,
Well, I'll make sure
awesome
that
stuff.
I'll get some cool artwork up as when we see this on video. We'll have some
Yeah,
cool reference material. So,
yeah.
Steve, man, this is terrific fun talking to you, and
This was great. I
I'm
enjoyed
really looking
this.
forward to your book. Can you tell
Thanks.
us a little bit about? Well, first, tell us a little bit about the book and the
Okay.
launch date and where we can find you.
Okay. So I I give the overall premise because there's a lot of spoilers that I don't want to give out. So
Right.
the overall premise of the book is you have these you have it takes place now, right now in our world, in our time. We're going people are going around about their normal sort of business, and there's all this stuff happening in the background that we're not aware of because um the magic still exists, the magic that you hear about in all these fantasy stories or myths and legends. But what happened was the elves got together. They formed a council with the other races, the other fantasy races, and they decided uh, close to 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago that the humans, they're just messing this place up. It won't listen to us. We've tried to intervene, and we're just gonna disappear. So they hide behind a veil, which is
Hmm,
takes place in our world. And
I get it.
so they're there, and then 3,000 years later, there are things that are happening in the world. And these two guys, Jeremy is a fourth grade teacher in New York City, and Masaru is a just graduated high school in Japan, and they meet some people that they can't quite understand, and they get brought on this journey. And there's all this really cool stuff that happens that, like I said, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but
Yeah, don't give away
you
too
know,
much.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but there's if you're into myths and legends and mythology and all that stuff, it's all there. And you know, creating this series, that's what it was about. It was the marriage of um, a sort of a marriage, and also a catharsis of growing up and believing in magic when I was a kid, and then getting older and realizing the magic just isn't there anymore. There. So that's kind of where the book where the idea of the book came from.
It sounds terrific. I can't wait to read it.
Awesome. I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to book number 4 in your series, in the Waterworld series.
Thanks.
I've already placed my pledge for that, and I'm looking
Much
forward to it.
appreciated. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll put the links here at the bottom for those that are so inclined. Please take a follow here for Steve's project. I'm really looking forward to the new novel. And hey, this was a pleasure, man. I had a lot of fun doing
It
this
was a
one.
lot of fun. Yeah, yep. And if if you're looking and you want to talk fantasy, you can reach me at stevenguglich.com or theveilsaga.com. I'd love to talk more fantasy with anybody who's interested.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, Steve, thanks once again. And thanks to our viewers for turning in. If you'd like to leave your comments below, especially if you disagree with us, we'd love to hear what you think.
Yes.
And thanks for watching. See you around.